The afternoon sunlight painted golden rectangles across the kitchen floor as I kicked the front door shut behind me. The familiar squeak of hinges needed oiling, the scent of pine sol and yesterday's meatloaf wrapping around me like a worn blanket. "Mom? Jake?" My voice cracked on the second syllable, too loud in the sudden quiet. "I'm home." Silence. Not just absence of noise, but the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums. The house should have been vibrating with Dad's Springsteen cassette tape blaring from the garage. Born in the USA on endless repeat while he fixed the lawnmower for the third time this month. Jake should have been sprawled across the living room carpet, PlayStation controller in hand, shouting obscenities at whatever first-person shooter had his attention that week. And Mom? Mom should have been burning something on the stove, humming Les Miserables off-key, the way she always did when she thought no one was listening. My backpack slid from my shoulder and hit the floor with its usual thump, but the sound echoed strangely, like the house was holding its breath. My stomach twisted as I moved through the empty rooms, my sneakers squeaking on linoleum that suddenly felt foreign beneath my feet. Then I saw it. A single sheet of notebook paper, the kind with the blue lines and pink margin that Mom always used for grocery lists, taped crookedly to the refrigerator door. A sliver of sunlight caught the edge of the tape, making it glow like some kind of sick halo. My fingers trembled as I reached for it, the tape sticking stubbornly before releasing with a soft rip. The sound was obscenely loud. "You figure it out?" Just 4 words in Mom's loopy handwriting. The exclamation point dug so deep into the paper I could feel the indentation on the other side. The pen had skipped on the upstroke of the F, just like it always did when she wrote too fast. I laughed. A sharp, ugly sound that bounced off the empty walls. "Very funny, guys," I muttered to the silent house, pulling out my phone with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. No missed calls, no texts, just the stupid selfie Jake and I took yesterday morning, his arm slung over my shoulder as we waited for the school bus. His grin was too wide, his braces catching the sunlight. "Smile, loser," he'd said, elbowing me in the ribs. "It's not my fault you failed your chem test." The upstairs confirmed it wasn't a joke. Mom's closet, half empty, the hangers jangling like wind chimes when I shoved them aside. Her favorite blue dress gone, the one she wore to parent-teacher conferences because it makes me look like I have my life together. Dad's toolbox missing from its usual spot in the garage, the oil stain on the concrete the only proof it had ever been there. His faded world's best dad coffee mug, the one Jake made him in 3rd grade. Nowhere to be seen, but Jake's room. God, Jake's room was a punch to the gut. His bed was neatly made, the Star Wars comforter smoothed down with military precision. All his action figures, the ones he'd spent years collecting, the ones he never let me touch, gone from the shelves. The posters of his favorite athletes peeled from the walls, leaving behind faint rectangular ghosts. Only a single sock remained under the bed, its mate long lost to the laundry, like some cruel afterthought. I sank onto his bare mattress, the springs creaking under my weight, the note crumpling in my fist. The digital clock on his nightstand blinked 4:37 p.m. in angry red numbers. At 4:37 p.m. yesterday, we'd been a family. Now I was alone. The phone rang 15 times before I gave up. Each ring was a hammer to my chest, the sound echoing through the empty house like a taunt. "They'll pick up this time," I told myself on ring 5. "They're just pulling into a gas station," I reasoned, by ring 10. By ring 15, my throat had closed up so tight I couldn't swallow. Mom's cell went straight to voicemail, her chirpy recorded voice saying, "You've reached the Canes! Leave us a message!" In that sing-song tone she used when pretending we were some perfect suburban family. I could picture her recording it. That tight smile she wore when things were falling apart, but she refused to let the neighbors know. Dad's number rang once before disconnecting with a harsh click that sounded like a door slamming. I called again immediately, my thumb smearing sweat across the screen. This time it didn't even ring. Jake's iPhone, the brand new one I'd spent 2 hours helping him pick out last month, the one he'd saved allowance for 6 months to afford, gave the robotic response, "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." I threw my phone across the kitchen. It skidded under the table where Jake and I had eaten Pop-Tarts that morning, him stealing the strawberry one from my plate like always. The sun bled orange across the linoleum as I sat at the kitchen table, the note flattened before me like some kind of sacred text. Maybe if I stared at it long enough, the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. "You figure it out!" The exclamation point looked almost cheerful. That was the worst part. I traced the indentation with my fingertip, remembering how Mom would leave similar notes on the fridge when she worked late. Leftovers in Tupperware, or Jake has soccer at 5. Never anything like this. Never anything that felt like a knife between the ribs. The refrigerator hummed, then clicked off with a shudder that echoed through the silent house. The sudden quiet was worse than the noise. It was the sound of abandonment. At midnight, I crept into my parents' bedroom like a thief. The scent of Mom's perfume, that cheap vanilla body spray from the drugstore that she'd worn since I was 10, still clung to her pillow. I pressed my face into it and inhaled deeply, the familiar smell making my eyes burn. Dad's aftershave lingered on the bathroom towels, that musky, woodsy scent that used to mean Saturday mornings when he'd ruffle my hair and say, "Come on, slugger, let's get pancakes." Now it just smelled like betrayal. I curled up on their bed, the note clutched to my chest like some twisted security blanket. The tears came then. Great, heaving sobs that shook my whole body. I cried like I hadn't since I was 6 years old and broke my arm falling out of the oak tree in the backyard. Back then, Dad had carried me inside while Mom called the doctor. Now there was no one to hear me. The electricity shut off at 9:06 the next morning. I woke to the refrigerator, giving one last pitiful groan before falling silent. The sudden quiet startled me awake, my heart pounding like I'd been running. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. The house felt different in the daylight, emptier, more final. I checked my phone, cracked from last night's throw but still working. For the 100th time, no calls, no texts. The last message from Mom was from 2 days ago. "Don't forget to take the chicken out of the freezer." That's when I knew, truly knew, they weren't coming back. The realization hit like a physical blow. I doubled over, gasping for air, as if someone had punched me in the gut. My vision swam, the note crumpling in my fist as I finally understood. They'd left me. On purpose. And they weren't coming back. The silence after the power shut off pressed against my eardrums like physical weight. I sat on the cold linoleum floor, my back pressed against the now silent refrigerator that had hummed a constant background melody my entire life. The absence of sound was somehow louder than noise. I stared at the light switch across the kitchen, the one with the little smiley face sticker Jake had put there when he was 6. My finger hovered over it for the dozenth time, flicking it up and down uselessly. Click, click, click. The hollow sound of the mechanism working with no result made my chest ache. My stomach growled violently, the sound echoing in the empty kitchen. 3 days without real food had left me lightheaded, but the thought of eating made bile rise in my throat. The last meal I'd eaten here was Tuesday's breakfast. Jake stealing bacon from my plate, Dad reading the paper, Mom burning the toast like always. I forced myself to open the fridge. The rubber seal resisted with a wet sucking sound. The faint smell of sour milk and rotting vegetables hit me like a physical blow. A half-gallon of 2% sat sweating on the top shelf, its expiration date 2 days away. I grabbed it without thinking, the cool plastic slippery in my hand. The carton felt lighter than it should be. Mom must have used the last of it for her morning coffee before they left. The first sip tasted wrong. A cloying sweetness that turned acidic on my tongue. God damn it! I spat it into the sink, the white liquid swirling down the drain in lazy spirals. My throat burned with something more than spoiled milk. Tears blurred my vision as I hurled the carton across the kitchen with all my strength. It exploded against the cabinet where Mom kept her good china, the set she only brought out when Grandma visited. Rancid milk painted flowery patterns across the wood grain, dripping slowly onto the counter below. The crash echoed through the empty house, followed by the pitiful patter of droplets hitting linoleum. I slid down the cabinets until I was sitting in a growing puddle of milk, my knees pulled tight to my chest. The note was still crumpled in my pocket, its edges digging into my thigh through the denim like a physical accusation. "You figure it out." The words pulsed in my head with each heartbeat. I pressed my forehead against my knees and screamed until my voice cracked. 3 days later, the hunger pains became unbearable. I stood on Mrs. Alvarez's porch for what felt like hours, shifting from foot to foot on the welcome mat that read "Mi casa su casa" in cheerful script. The curtain in her front window twitched. She'd seen me. My stomach twisted as I raised a trembling hand to knock. What would I even say? "Hey, my family abandoned me. Can I borrow a cup of sugar?" The door creaked open before my knuckles made contact. "Alex?" Mrs. Alvarez's dark eyes widened as she took in my greasy hair, the hollows under my eyes that no amount of sleep could fix. Her gaze dropped to my shaking hands, the dirt under my nails from sleeping in the backyard shed. ¿Qué pasó, mijo? The kindness in her voice undid me. My vision blurred as I fumbled in my pocket, pulling out the now wrinkled note. The paper made a soft crinkling sound as I unfolded it with trembling fingers. My parents. The words stuck in my throat like broken glass. I held out the note like it explained everything. She took it gently, her gold bangles clinking softly. I watched her face as she read, her lips moving silently over the words. Her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something that looked like rage. Then she did something completely unexpected. Mrs. Alvarez pulled me into a hug so tight I could feel the press of her gold cross necklace against my cheekbone, the familiar scent of her rosewater perfume enveloping me. Her arms were warm and solid, her embrace unyielding as I shook against her. Pobrecito, she murmured into my hair. One hand cradled the back of my head like I was something precious. Entra, mi niño. Come inside. Her kitchen smelled like heaven. Garlic sizzling in olive oil, something sweet baking in the oven, the earthy scent of black beans simmering on the stove. My stomach growled so loudly it echoed off the terracotta tiles. Mrs. Alvarez didn't comment. She simply guided me to the wooden chair at her kitchen table, the one with the chipped blue paint where I'd sat countless times doing homework with her daughter Sophia before their family moved back to Mexico. She moved with quiet efficiency, piling food onto a chipped floral plate. Steaming yellow rice studded with peas, crispy skinned chicken glistening with citrus marinade, golden fried plantains caramelized at the edges. A glass of cold horchata appeared beside the plate, condensation already forming on the sides. Come, she ordered, setting the feast before me. Eat. The first bite of her arroz con pollo made my eyes burn. The flavors exploded on my tongue, the tang of lime, the heat of cumin, the richness of chicken fat. I shoveled it in like I'd never eat again, barely tasting it through the tears streaming down my face. Mrs. Alvarez sat across from me, her hands folded quietly on the table. She didn't speak as I ate, didn't ask questions. She simply refilled my plate when it emptied and pressed a clean handkerchief into my hand when my nose started running. It was the first kindness I'd known since the world ended. The first paycheck. The golden griddle smelled like decades of burnt coffee and maple syrup soaked into vinyl booth cushions. My hands were raw and cracked from hours in dishwater, the cheap industrial soap stripping them of any natural oils. I flexed my fingers under the fluorescent lights, watching the broken skin across my knuckles stretch and bleed. The pain was grounding, proof I was still here, still alive despite everything. Marty, the grizzled line cook with a spiderweb tattoo peeking out from his collar, slid a plate of pancakes across the stainless steel counter. The china clattered against the metal surface. Eat, he grunted, not looking up from the grill where bacon sizzled. Your skin and bones. I shook my head, pushing the plate away. Can't? Manager said no free meals? Marty snorted, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. Manager's an asshole who's banging the hostess in the walk-in right now. He shoved the plate back toward me with his spatula. Eat before I shove it down your throat. The first bite was pure bliss. Fluffy buttermilk pancakes drowning in syrup so thick it coated my tongue. I nearly moaned at the sweetness, the warmth spreading through my chest. It was the first hot meal I'd had since Mrs. Alvarez's kitchen. Marty watched me eat from the corner of his eye, his tattooed arms crossed over his grease-stained apron. The diner's neon lights reflected off his bald head as he leaned against the grill. How old are you really, kid? His voice was quieter now, almost gentle beneath the gravel. I hesitated, syrup dripping from my fork. 17, I admitted around a mouthful of pancakes. He nodded like he'd expected that answer, his gaze flicking to my ragged sneakers, the too large shirt I'd scavenged from a donation bin. You got a place to stay? Garage apartment, Mrs. Alvarez's. Good. He turned back to the grill, scraping at an imaginary spot with his spatula. Be here tomorrow at 5 a.m. Don't be late. When payday came, I stared at the envelope in my hands. $127.84 in cash after taxes. The bills felt heavy and important, the first real money I'd ever earned. I went straight to the grocery store, clutching my list like a lifeline. Ramen, peanut butter, bread, the essentials. As I stood in line behind a woman with 2 toddlers, the note in my pocket seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. You figure it out. I looked down at my basket, at the paycheck in my other hand. I was trying The garage apartment smelled like dust and old paint, with a faint undertone of motor oil that clung stubbornly to the walls. I followed Mrs. Alvarez up the narrow wooden stairs, each step creaking under our weight. The keys she handed me were warm from her pocket, jingling softly in the quiet space between us. "Your father helped Mr. Alvarez build this," she said, running a hand along the doorframe where the wood was still smooth from years of touch. "Good bones." The door swung open with a groan, revealing a single room that was smaller than Jake's walk-in closet back home. A sagging twin bed dominated the space. Its floral quilt faded from years of sunlight. A dresser missing 2 knobs stood against one wall, its surface scarred with water rings and cigarette burns. In the corner, a hot plate from the 1980s sat on a folding table, its coils rusted but intact. A tiny bathroom completed the space. Just a shower stall, toilet, and sink so small, I wasn't sure my hands would fit under the faucet. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly tight. "It's perfect," I lied, my voice cracking on the word. Mrs. Alvarez fixed me with a knowing look, her dark eyes softening at the edges. "You'll make it yours," she said firmly, pointing to a cardboard box in the corner. "Some things to start." Inside I found mismatched dishes, a chipped blue plate, 2 mugs with faded college logos, 3 forks of varying sizes. A fraying towel set still bore the tags from some long-ago hotel stay. And at the bottom, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, was a framed photo of Sophia and me at middle school graduation, our arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning like idiots. My fingers trembled as I traced the glass. "I can't—" "You can," Mrs. Alvarez interrupted, her voice brooking no argument. "And you will." That first night, I lay awake on the too-soft mattress, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the garage settling, the creak of wood, the skitter of something small in the walls. Outside, a car passed occasionally, its headlights painting fleeting rectangles across the ceiling. The pillow smelled faintly of detergent and something floral, lavender maybe. I pressed my face into it and breathed deeply, pretending just for a moment that it was my own pillow back home, that any second Jake would barge in complaining about homework, or Dad would shout up the stairs to turn off the damn light already. But the only sound was my own shaky breathing, and the pillow was just a pillow, and home was gone. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks later, in the cereal aisle of the corner grocery where I'd started stocking shelves. The store was quiet, the fluorescent lights humming overhead as I restocked boxes of Cheerios. Then a woman's laugh echoed down the aisle. That particular pitch and cadence, the way it started low and bubbled up into something bright, just like Mom's. My head snapped up so fast my neck cracked. The woman wasn't her, of course, just some stranger with the same shoulder-length brown hair holding a little boy's hand as they debated between Fruit Loops and Corn Pops. The boy, maybe 6 or 7, was bouncing on his toes, his small fingers tugging at her sleeve. "Please, Mom, the red ones?" Something inside me shattered. I barely made it to the stockroom before my knees gave out. The concrete floor was cold against my palms as I gasped for air, tears streaming down my face in hot, silent rivers. All the anger, the fear, the aching loneliness I'd been swallowing for weeks came pouring out in great heaving sobs that left me lightheaded and raw. I don't know how long I sat there, curled between pallets of paper towels, my back pressed against the rough cardboard. Long enough for my breathing to slow, for the tears to dry tacky on my cheeks. The door creaked open, and Marty's familiar bulk filled the doorway. He took one look at me, red-eyed, snot-nosed, pathetic, and sighed. "Kid," he said, lowering himself stiffly to sit beside me. He smelled like grease and cigarettes, the familiar sense oddly comforting. "I'm fine," I choked out, wiping my nose on my sleeve. "Bullshit!" He pulled a flask from his jacket and unscrewed the cap with practiced ease. "Drink." The whiskey burned going down, but the warmth spreading through my chest steadied me. I coughed, my eyes watering anew. Marty took the flask back, his calloused fingers brushing mine. "First rule of survival," he said, taking a swig himself. "You gotta let it out sometimes." We sat in silence as the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the distant sound of the store's muzak filtering through the door. "Second rule?" I asked eventually, my voice hoarse. Marty capped the flask. "You get back up." Mrs. Alvarez cornered me after Sunday dinner, her hands wrapped around a mug of café con leche. The steam curled up between us as she stirred in slow, deliberate circles. "A woman came asking about you today," she said, her voice carefully neutral. I froze, a forkful of flan halfway to my mouth. The sweet custard suddenly tasted like nothing at all. Social services? She nodded, her gold hoop earrings catching the light. I told her you were my nephew helping me out after Mr. Alvarez passed? Her dark eyes met mine, unflinching. This is only temporary, mijo. They will keep looking. The flan turned to ash in my mouth. If they took me into the system now, I'd lose everything. The job, the apartment, my fragile independence. The thought of being shoved into some group home, of starting over yet again, made my hands shake. What do I do? Mrs. Alvarez reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her skin warm against mine. We be very careful, she said firmly. No more school records, no doctor visits. You stay quiet, stay small. That night, I lay awake in the garage apartment, planning exit strategies. If a social worker came, I'd go out the back window and over the fence. I'd sleep at the diner, in the booth by the kitchen where no one ever sat. A knock at the door sent my heart into my throat. Alex, it's Sophia. I opened the door to find Mrs. Alvarez's daughter standing there, a box of clothes balanced on one hip. She looked older than I remembered, her dark hair longer, her smile softer. Mom thought these might fit you, she said, her gaze taking in my threadbare t-shirt, the two short sleeves of my only sweater. We sat on the floor sorting through the box, a few sweaters, some jeans, a winter coat that smelled faintly of her perfume. As she told me about college in Mexico City, about her classes and her roommate in the mercado near her apartment, I almost felt normal again. Like I was just a guy hanging out with an old friend, not a runaway orphan hiding from the system. When she left, the apartment felt warmer somehow, the walls less close. I woke on my 18th birthday to insistent knocking. Mrs. Alvarez stood on the landing, holding a plate of pan dulce with a single candle stuck in the largest concha. The morning light caught the silver in her hair as she smiled. Feliz cumpleaños, mijo, she said softly. The sweetbread tasted like childhood birthdays, like before Dad lost his job, before the shouting matches, before everything went wrong. The sugar crystals burst on my tongue, the cinnamon filling my nose. Marty slid a chocolate milkshake across the counter that afternoon, the glass sweating in the diner's heat. Happy birthday, kid. I blinked. How did you? Alvarez called. He wiped the counter with more force than necessary, his tattooed arms flexing. 18 means they can't drag you into foster care now. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I was safe, truly safe. That night in my tiny apartment, I let myself imagine my family for the first time in months. Were they celebrating Jake's birthday somewhere? Did he blow out candles on a cake, surrounded by presents and laughter? Did they ever think about me, about the son and brother they'd left behind? The candle on my concha had long since burned out, but I made a wish anyway, to stop wondering, to stop hurting, to be enough on my own. Outside, a car passed, its headlights briefly illuminating the framed photo of Sophia and me on the dresser. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel quite so alone. 15 years later. The boardroom windows stretched floor to ceiling, offering a panoramic view of the city that had become mine. I adjusted the cufflinks on my tailored suit, a far cry from the grease-stained diner uniform I'd worn 15 years ago, as my assistant placed a fresh cup of coffee before me. The rich, earthy aroma of single-origin Ethiopian beans filled the air, a stark contrast to the burnt swill Marty used to brew. My phone buzzed against the polished mahogany table. Unknown caller. I silenced it with a tap, returning my attention to the quarterly reports. The numbers blurred before my eyes as the phone vibrated again and again. Excuse me, I murmured to the room of executives, stepping into the hall. The glass walls reflected my image back at me, a man who looked like he had it all together. Alex Kane, I answered, my professional mask firmly in place. Alex? Oh, God, Alex? The voice on the other end cracked. It's Mom! The hallway tilted. I braced a hand against the cool glass, my reflection warping under my fingers. That voice, higher than I remembered, trembling with emotion, sent me spiraling back to a kitchen with a note on the fridge. 15 years? 15 years of silence? What do you want? The words came out sharper than I'd intended, edged with all the bitterness I'd thought I'd buried. A shaky inhale. We're in town. We'd like to see you. I closed my eyes. The note flashed behind my eyelids. You figure it out. The ink as fresh in my memory as it had been that terrible afternoon. Fine, I said curtly. The diner on 5th. Noon tomorrow. I hung up before she could respond, before the dam of emotions I'd spent years building could break.
The golden griddle hadn't changed. The same sticky vinyl booths, the same smell of burned coffee and maple syrup clinging to the air. Marty's absence was palpable. No gruff voice shouting orders from the kitchen, no familiar clang of the grill. But the diner remained, a time capsule of where my life had pivoted. They arrived 10 minutes late. My mother looked diminished. Her once blonde hair had gone steel gray, pulled back in a limp ponytail. Her hands, always perfectly manicured in my memory, clutched a cheap pleather purse like a lifeline. Dad stood stiffly behind her, his proud military posture slumped under some invisible weight. And Jake? My breath caught. The scrawny 12-year-old who'd stolen my cereal and begged me to play video games was gone. In his place stood a gaunt man swimming in a hoodie 2 sizes too big, his face pale beneath a shock of unkempt brown hair. "Alex," Mom breathed, reaching for me with trembling fingers. I stepped back, the scent of her drugstore perfume, the same vanilla scent from all those years ago, hitting me like a punch to the gut. "Sit." The booth was too small for all our history. Mom's hands fluttered like wounded birds as she slid in. "You look successful." I sipped my black coffee, the same order I'd had as a broke teenager. "I am." Silence stretched between us, thick with everything unsaid. Dad cleared his throat, the sound like gravel. "We're in a bad spot. The house got foreclosed, and Jake's medical bills." "Medical bills?" My cup hit the saucer with a clatter. Jake finally looked up. His eyes, the same hazel as mine, were shadowed with exhaustion. "Leukemia. In remission now, but..." His voice trailed off as he absently rubbed at the IV bruise visible on his wrist. I studied him, really studied him, taking in the dark circles, the way his hands shook slightly. 15 years vanished in an instant. "Are you okay?" He gave a half shrug that didn't reach his eyes. "Getting there."
My mother seized the opening. "We need help, Alex, just until we get back on our feet." I leaned back, the vinyl creaking under my weight. "Let me get this straight. You abandoned me with no explanation. 15 years of silence, and now you show up because... What? You need money?" Mom's eyes filled with tears. "We're family." The word hung in the air between us, heavy with irony. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a yellowed piece of paper, carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. "Remember this?" I slid it across the table. Mom's gasp was audible. The note, "You figure it out," now had my addition beneath it in bold black ink. I did. I stood, tossing a $100 bill on the table. "Lunch is on me." "Alex, please!" Mom grabbed my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "We're sorry. We were young. We were struggling." I gently pried her fingers loose, her wedding band cold against my skin. I was 17. The walk to the door felt miles long, each step heavier than the last. Then, "Alex!" Jake's voice. I turned. He stood there, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I didn't know," he whispered. "They told me you were staying with a friend. By the time I found out..." His voice broke. "I'm sorry." I studied my little brother, really studied him. The Jake I knew had been all scraped knees and loud laughter. This man was a stranger, yet his eyes held the same vulnerability I remembered. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a business card. "My personal number," I said quietly. "If you need anything, call me." Then I walked out, the bell above the door jingling like it had 15 years ago when I'd first walked in, desperate and alone. The letter arrived a month later on heavy cream stationery, the kind I now used for corporate correspondence. "Dear Alex, I'm staying with a friend in Portland. Got a job at a bookstore, the kind with creaky wooden floors and too many cats. Treatment's going okay. Some days are better than others. I know you don't owe us anything. But if you're ever in town, coffee? Just you and me. There's a diner by the river that reminds me of the old place. Jake." I traced the familiar slant of his handwriting, the way he still dotted his I's with little circles like he had as a kid. The letter found a place on my office wall, framed next to my first business license, the one I'd gotten at 19 with a loan from Marty. 2 pieces of paper that told the story of my life, one about abandonment, the other about perseverance. I picked up my phone. "Portland next week. There's a diner by the river." I hit send before I could overthink it. Some bonds, it seemed, even abandonment couldn't completely break. Outside my window, the city lights twinkled like stars. The The same stars that had watched over a 17-year-old boy sleeping in a shed all those years ago. I wondered if they were shining over Portland, too. The end.